The boot hit the porch with a thud that changed everything. Inside it, a letter soaked in a dead man's blood. The girl who carried it was 8 years old and running out of time. The rancher who read it dropped to his knees because the past he'd buried had just walked up to his door, barefoot and broken, asking for a debt he thought he'd never have to pay. If you want to know whether mercy or violence wins when wolves come for an orphan, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. The dust never settled in Cutter's Gap. It hung in the air like a grudge, thick and patient, waiting for something to stir it up again. Elias Mercer had been stirring it for 20 years, boots heavy on dry earth, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes that had seen too much and said too little. His ranch sat at the edge of nowhere, a place men came to when they wanted to be forgotten, or when they needed to forget. He wasn't expecting company that October morning. He never did. The sun was barely cracking the horizon when he heard it, a soft, uneven shuffle on the porch. Not the clop of a horse, not the rattle of a wagon. Something smaller, something wrong. Elias set down his coffee and reached for the revolver he kept by the door. Out here, you didn't open up without knowing what was on the other side. He'd made that mistake once. Never again. He cracked the door. Standing there, swaying like a branch in the wind, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, her dress torn at the hem, her feet bare and blistered. In her small hands, she clutched a man's boot, scuffed leather, the kind a working man wore until it fell apart. She looked up at Elias with eyes that had seen something no child should ever see. "Mister," she whispered, voice raw as sandpaper. This letter was in Papa's boot. She held out the boot with trembling hands. Elias stared at it, then at her. His gut tightened. He didn't take the boot. Not yet. "Where's your father, girl?" Her lips quivered. He told me to run. He said if he didn't come back, I had to bring this to Elias Mercer." The name hit him like a fist. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years, not by someone who mattered, not by someone who knew. "Who's your father?" "Thomas Hale." The world tilted. Elias gripped the doorframe. Thomas Hale. Tom. The man who'd pulled him out of a burning trench in a war that felt like another lifetime. The man who'd taken a bullet meant for Elias and laughed about it later over whiskey, saying debts between brothers didn't need counting. "Where is he?" Elias's voice came out harder than he meant. The girl's face crumpled. "They killed him." Elias felt something crack open inside his chest, something he'd sealed shut a long time ago. He knelt down, eye level with the girl, and this time he took the boot. It was heavier than it should have been, not just leather and worn sole. Weight carried meaning out here, always had. He reached inside and pulled out a folded piece of paper, stained dark along one edge. Blood, old enough to have dried brown. The letter was written in Tom's handwriting. Elias would have known it anywhere, cramped, slanted, like a man writing in a hurry. "Elias, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and my girl's got nowhere else to turn. I got tangled up in something I couldn't get out of. A debt I couldn't pay. Not in money, not in time. The kind men like us know too well. The kind that follows you even when you run. His name is Garrett Voss. He calls himself a financier. Truth is, he's a vulture. He loans money to desperate men and takes everything when they can't pay. Land, livestock, lives. I borrowed from him 3 years ago when my wife got sick. I paid him back twice over. Didn't matter. He said the interest compounded. Said I signed a contract. Said I owed him until I was dead or working for him. I told him no. So he came for Nora. I got her out, but they're still coming. Voss doesn't let things go. He'll say she's collateral. He'll say she's part of the contract. And out here, law doesn't mean much when a man has money and men with guns. I'm asking you to do what I once did for you. Stand when it costs everything. Keep her safe. Raise her if you can. And if Voss comes looking, don't let him take her. She's all I got left of anything good in this world. You don't owe me, brother, but I'm asking anyway. Tom." Elias read the letter twice, then a third time. His hands didn't shake, but his jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He folded the paper slowly, deliberately, and slipped it into his shirt pocket. He looked at the girl, Nora. She was watching him with those wide, exhausted eyes, waiting for him to say something, anything. "You walked here?" he asked. She nodded. 2 days. Papa told me the way before they came. "You eat?" She shook her head. Elias stood and opened the door wider. "Come inside." Nora hesitated, glancing back over her shoulder like she expected someone to be there. When she turned back, Elias saw it. The kind of fear that lived in the bones. The kind that didn't go away just because you were safe for a moment. "You're safe here," he said. It wasn't a promise he made lightly. She stepped inside. The ranch house was plain. Wooden floors, a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs. Elias didn't keep much, didn't need much. He pulled out a chair for Nora and she sat, still clutching the boot like it was the only thing tethering her to the world. He moved to the kitchen, sliced bread, pulled out some dried meat and cheese. He set it in front of her without a word. She stared at it. "Eat," he said gently. She picked up the bread with both hands and bit into it like she hadn't seen food in days. She probably hadn't. Elias poured her water from the pitcher and watched as she drank it down in 3 long gulps. He refilled it. She drank again. When she finally slowed, he sat across from her. "Tell me what happened." Nora set the bread down, her fingers twisted together in her lap. "Papa said we had to leave, in the middle of the night. He woke me up and told me to pack 1 bag. We got on the horse and we rode. I didn't know where we were going. He wouldn't tell me." "How long did you ride?" "I don't know. It got light, then it got dark again. We stopped by a creek. Papa said we'd rest. But then," her voice broke, "then they came." Elias leaned forward. "How many?" 4, maybe 5. I don't... She squeezed her eyes shut. "Papa told me to hide in the rocks. He said no matter what I heard, I couldn't come out. I heard shouting, and then gunshots." Elias's jaw clenched. "I stayed hidden like he said. I waited until it was quiet, and then I waited more. When I came out, Papa was..." She couldn't finish. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she didn't sob. She'd cried herself out already. They were gone. Papa was on the ground. He wasn't moving, but he was still warm, and he told me, his voice was so quiet. He told me to take his boot. He said the letter was inside. He said to find Elias Mercer. He said you'd know what to do. Elias felt the weight of it settle over him like an iron yoke. Tom had died protecting his daughter, and with his last breath, he'd sent her here. "And then you walked." Nora nodded. "I didn't know what else to do." Elias reached across the table and rested his hand over hers. "You did good, Nora. You did real good." She looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, something other than fear flickered in her eyes. Hope. Fragile and uncertain, but there. "Are you really Elias Mercer?" "I am." "Papa said you were the bravest man he ever knew." Elias's throat tightened. "Your papa was braver." "Are they going to come here, the men who killed him?" Elias didn't lie to children. "Maybe." "What will you do?" He met her gaze, steady and sure. "I'll keep you safe. That's what I'll do." She nodded slowly, like she was trying to decide whether to believe him. "You can stay here as long as you need," Elias continued. "This is your home now, if you want it to be." Nora looked around the small, plain room. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had. "Okay," she whispered. Elias stood. "There's a room in the back. It's not fancy, but it's got a bed and a window. You can sleep there. I'll keep watch." "You won't leave?" "I won't leave." She followed him down the narrow hallway. The room was small, just big enough for a bed, a wooden chest, and a chair. Elias had used it for storage, but it was clean. He pulled a blanket from the chest and laid it over the bed. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll figure out the rest later." Nora climbed onto the bed, still holding the boot. Elias didn't take it from her. Some things a person needed to hold on to. He closed the door halfway and walked back to the main room. He poured himself another cup of coffee, though it had gone cold. He didn't care. He stood by the window looking out at the empty stretch of land that surrounded his ranch. Somewhere out there, Garrett Voss was counting his money and his men. Somewhere out there, Tom Hale's body was lying in the dirt, waiting for the vultures. And somewhere deep inside Elias Mercer, the part of him he'd tried to bury, the part that had fought and bled and killed in a war that never really ended, was waking up. He pulled the letter from his pocket and read it one more time. "Don't let him take her." "I won't," Elias said aloud to the empty room, to the ghost of his friend. He folded the letter and set it on the table. Then he walked to the corner of the room where a long wooden case sat covered in dust. He hadn't opened it in years, didn't need to, but he needed to now. He unlatched the case and lifted the lid. Inside was a rifle, military issue, scope still attached, barrel still oiled. Next to it, a pistol he'd carried through 3 campaigns. Below that, a knife with a handle worn smooth by his grip. Elias lifted the rifle and checked the chamber. Still clean, still ready. He set it by the door. Then he sat down at the table, facing the window, and waited. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later. Nora had settled in as best she could. She didn't talk much, but she followed Elias around the ranch like a shadow. She helped him feed the horses, gather eggs from the hen house, mend a section of fence that had come loose. She worked without complaint, and Elias got the sense that staying busy kept her mind off the things she didn't want to remember. He didn't push her to talk. Grief had its own schedule. He knew that better than most. On the second evening, just as the sun dipped below the ridge, Elias saw them. 2 riders, silhouetted against the fading light, sitting on a low hill about a quarter-mile out. They didn't approach, didn't call out, just sat there, watching. Elias stood on the porch, rifle in hand, and watched them back. Nora came to the door. "Who are they?" "Don't know yet." "Are they the ones?" "Maybe." She stepped closer to him, and Elias felt her small hand grip the back of his shirt. "Stay inside," he said quietly, "but inside, Nora." She obeyed, but he could feel her eyes on him through the window. The rider stayed for 10 minutes. Then, without a word, they turned and rode off into the dusk. Elias didn't move until they were out of sight. When he came back inside, Nora was sitting at the table, hands folded in her lap. "They're watching us," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "What do we do?" Elias set the rifle by the door and sat across from her. "We wait, and we get ready." "Ready for what?" "For when they stop watching and start moving." Nora's face was pale, but she didn't cry. She'd learned not to. "Papa said Mr. Voss doesn't give up." "Your papa was right." "Then what are we going to do?" Elias leaned back in his chair, his eyes hard. "We're going to make him wish he had." Well, over the next few days, the riders came back. Never close, never threatening, just there, watching, waiting. It was a tactic Elias recognized. Psychological warfare. Make your enemy nervous, make them wonder when the hammer would drop. But Elias Mercer had fought in a war where waiting was a weapon. He knew how to be patient, and he knew how to prepare. He spent the mornings reinforcing the ranch. He checked the locks on the barn, cleared sight lines around the house, moved supplies into the cellar. He taught Nora where to hide if shooting started, under the floorboards in the back room, a space just big enough for a child. "If I tell you to go, you go," he told her. "You don't ask questions. You don't wait. You go. Understand?" She nodded. He also sent word. There was a man in town, a former soldier named Caleb Rust, who'd served with Elias and Tom. Caleb ran a small trading post and kept his ear to the ground. Elias rode into town one morning, left Nora with a neighbor he trusted, and found Caleb behind the counter, sorting through a shipment of canned goods. "Well, hell," Caleb said when he saw Elias walk in. "Didn't think I'd see you until winter." "I need information," Elias said, wasting no time. Caleb set down the can he was holding and studied Elias's face. "What kind?" "Garrett Voss. You know him?" Caleb's expression darkened. "Yeah, I know him. Man's a snake with a ledger. Why?" "He's got a claim on a dead man's daughter. Says she's collateral on a debt." Caleb swore under his breath. "Tom Hale's kid? You heard?" "Word travels. Tom got himself killed a week ago. Some folks say it was bandits. Others say it was Voss's men." "It was Voss?" Caleb nodded slowly. And the girl's with you now? Yeah. Then you're in his sights too. I know. Caleb rubbed his jaw. Voss runs his operation out of Silver Bend. He's got maybe a dozen men on his payroll, hired guns mostly. He doesn't get his hands dirty, but he doesn't need to. He just points, and his dogs do the rest. Does he have law on his side? Caleb laughed bitterly. Out here? Law's whoever's got the most guns and the most money. Voss has both. Elias leaned against the counter. Then I'll need help. What kind of help? The kind that shoots straight. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. There's a few boys from the old unit still around. Me, obviously. There's Marcus Till. He's working a ranch about 15 miles north. And Jonah Creed. Last I heard, he was up in the hills trapping. Will they come? For you? Yeah. For Tom's kid? Damn right they will. Elias nodded. Send word. Tell them to be ready. I don't know when, but it's coming. What about the girl? She stays with me. Caleb met his eyes. You know what you're risking. I do. And you're doing it anyway. I am. Caleb grinned, a hard, wolfish grin. Then, I guess we're going to war. When Elias returned to the ranch that evening, Nora was sitting on the porch, watching the horizon. She looked up when she heard his horse. Did you find help? She asked. I did. Will they come? When the time's right. She was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice so small it almost broke him, she asked, Do you think Papa's proud of me? Elias dismounted and walked over to her. He crouched down so they were eye to eye. Your Papa died protecting you, Nora. That means he thought you were worth dying for. And I'd say that makes you about the most important person in the world. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, a tiny, fragile smile. Thank you, she whispered. Elias rested a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to thank me. This is what family does. She looked at him, surprised. We're family? We are now. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Nora Hale let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was going to be okay. But the riders kept coming, and Elias knew the storm was building. Soon it would break. And when it did, only one side would be left standing. The storm broke on a Tuesday. It started with silence, the kind that made the hairs on the back of Elias's neck stand up. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had died. Even the horses in the barn were restless, stamping and snorting like they could smell what was coming. Elias stood on the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes scanning the horizon. Nora was inside, washing the breakfast dishes. He'd taught her to stay away from the windows when he got that feeling. She was learning fast, too fast for a child her age. Then he saw them. Not 2 riders this time. 6, maybe 7. They came slow, spread out in a line, kicking up dust as they moved across the flatland toward the ranch. They weren't hiding anymore, weren't watching from a distance. They were coming, and they wanted him to know it. Elias set down his coffee and picked up his rifle. Nora, he called, keeping his voice calm. Time to go to your spot. She appeared in the doorway, dish towel still in her hands. Her face went pale when she saw the riders. Now, Elias said, more firmly. She dropped the towel and ran to the back room. He heard the floorboards creak as she lifted the hidden panel and slipped into the space below. She'd practiced it a dozen times. 3 seconds. That's all it took. Elias waited until he heard the panel slide back into place. Then he stepped off the porch and walked to the center of the yard, rifle loose in his hands, eyes locked on the approaching riders. They stopped about 30 yards out, close enough to talk, close enough to shoot if it came to that. The man in the center dismounted. He was tall, lean, dressed in a black coat that looked too expensive for the dust and heat. His boots were polished, his hat was new. Everything about him screamed money and control. Garrett Voss. Elias had never met him, but he knew the type. Men like Voss didn't get their hands dirty. They paid other men to do it for them. And judging by the 6 armed riders flanking him, he'd brought plenty of insurance. Voss smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You must be Elias Mercer. Elias didn't answer. I'm Garrett Voss. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Nothing here belongs to you. Voss's smile widened. I'm afraid you're mistaken. Thomas Hale signed a contract with me 3 years ago. When he failed to meet his obligations, the terms transferred to his estate. That includes his daughter. She's not property. According to the law, she is. Voss reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He held it up like it was scripture. This contract is legally binding. Thomas Hale agreed that in the event of his death, all assets, including dependents, would revert to me as payment for his debt. Elias's jaw tightened. You can't own a person. Not own. Hold in trust. Until the debt is satisfied. Voss tucked the paper back into his coat. I'm a reasonable man, Mr. Mercer. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to collect what's owed. Hand over the girl, and I'll be on my way. No. Voss's smile finally faded. I don't think you understand the situation you're in. I understand just fine. You killed her father. Now you want to take her, and I'm telling you that's not going to happen. One of the riders, a thick-necked man with a scar running down his cheek, spat into the dirt. We didn't come here to negotiate, Voss. Voss held up a hand. Patience, Mr. Calloway. He turned back to Elias. I didn't kill Thomas Hale. He made choices that led to his death. There's a difference. Not to me, Voss sighed like he was dealing with a stubborn child. Mr. Mercer, I admire your sense of honor. Truly, I do. But honor doesn't pay debts, and debts must be paid, one way or another. Then I'll pay it. Voss raised an eyebrow. You? How much did Tom owe? At the time of his death, $1,200? With compounded interest over the past 3 years, the total comes to just over $4,000. Elias didn't flinch. $4,000 was a fortune, more than most men made in 5 years, more than Elias had. I'll work it off, Voss laughed. Work it off? Mr. Mercer, you're a rancher. Even if you sold everything you own, you wouldn't come close. Then take what I've got. Take the land. Take the livestock. But you're not taking the girl. Voss studied him for a long moment. Then he shook his head. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. The contract specifies Thomas Hale's estate, not yours. You have no legal standing. I don't care about legal standing. That much is obvious. Voss glanced at the men behind him. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to bring the girl out here. You're going to hand her over. And then we're going to leave. If you cooperate, no one gets hurt. If you don't, he let the sentence hang. Elias shifted his grip on the rifle. I won't. And if I refuse? Voss's expression hardened. Then I'll take her anyway, and you'll be buried next to your friend. The yard went quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before violence. Elias could feel it pressing in from all sides. The weight of 6 men with guns, the heat of the sun, the beating of his own heart. He thought about Nora, hidden beneath the floorboards, listening to every word. He thought about Tom, bleeding out in the dirt, using his last breath to send his daughter to safety. He thought about the promise he'd made. Don't let him take her. Elias raised the rifle, slow and deliberate, until it was pointed at Voss's chest. You want her? Elias said quietly. You're going to have to go through me. Voss didn't move, but his eyes went cold. That can be arranged. Calloway reached for his gun, and then a voice cut through the tension like a blade. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Everyone turned. Standing at the edge of the yard, rifle in hand, was Caleb Rust. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood Marcus Till, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw, and Jonah Creed, wiry and sharp-eyed, a shotgun resting on his shoulder. All 3 of them had their weapons trained on Voss and his men. Caleb grinned. Odds just got a little more interesting, didn't they? Voss's face flushed with anger. This doesn't concern you. Sure it does, Caleb said. Elias is our brother. That makes it our concern. Marcus stepped forward. And Tom Hale was our brother too, which means his kid's under our protection. Jonah spat into the dirt. So if you want her, you're going to have to go through all of us. Calloway's hand hovered over his gun. There's more of us. For now, Caleb said, but we're better shots. Voss looked around, calculating. His men were tense, hands on their weapons, eyes darting between the three newcomers and Elias. The math wasn't in his favor anymore. Not out in the open, not with 4 rifles pointed at his chest. He smiled again, but this time it was thin and brittle. This isn't over. Yeah, it is, Elias said. Voss mounted his horse. You're making a mistake, Mr. Mercer. A very expensive mistake. I'll live with it. Voss turned his horse and looked back over his shoulder. Enjoy your ranch while you still have it, because when I come back I won't be asking nicely. He spurred his horse and rode off, his men falling in behind him. They disappeared over the ridge, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of hooves. Elias lowered his rifle. He didn't realize how hard his hands were shaking until he tried to set it down. Caleb walked over and clapped him on the shoulder. You all right? Yeah. You don't look all right. Elias exhaled slowly. He's coming back. Of course he is, Marcus said, joining them. Men like that don't let go, not until they've won or they're dead. Jonah spat again. So we make sure it's the second one. Elias shook his head. I won't ask you to die for this. You're not asking, Caleb said. We're offering. Tom saved my life in the war. I owe him. And if that means standing between his kid and a bastard like Voss, then that's what I'll do. Marcus nodded. Same, Jonah grinned. Besides, I was getting bored. Elias looked at them. These men who'd fought beside him, bled beside him, buried friends beside him. Men who'd answered the call without hesitation. Thank you, he said quietly. Caleb waved him off. Save it for after we win. The floorboards creaked, and Nora emerged from the house, eyes wide. She looked at the 4 men standing in the yard, then at Elias. Are they gone? For now. She walked over, stopping a few feet away, studying Caleb, Marcus, and Jonah with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Caleb crouched down so he was eye level with her. You must be Nora. She nodded. I knew your father. He was a good man. Her eyes glistened. He said you all fought together. We did, and we're going to make sure you're safe. That's a promise. Nora looked at Elias. Do they have to fight because of me? Elias knelt beside her. They're not fighting because of you. They're fighting because it's the right thing to do, and because your father would have done the same for any one of us. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't want anyone to get hurt. We know, Marcus said gently. But sometimes people get hurt anyway. That's just the way the world works. What matters is that we're choosing to stand up, and we're choosing to stand together. Nora took a shaky breath and nodded. Jonah looked around the ranch. So what's the plan? Elias stood. We fortify, we prepare, and we wait. For what? For Voss to make his move. Caleb crossed his arms. He'll bring more men next time, a lot more. I know. Then we'd better get to work. They spent the next 3 days turning the ranch into a fortress. Caleb and Marcus reinforced the barn, stacking hay bales to create cover and clearing sight lines. Jonah climbed onto the roof of the house and set up a sniper's nest with a clear view of the main approach. Elias dug trenches around the perimeter and filled them with sharpened stakes. Nora helped where she could, carrying water, fetching tools, keeping watch. She was quiet, but her presence was a reminder of why they were doing this. Every nail they hammered, every board they nailed into place was for her. On the 3rd night, they sat around the fire outside the house, passing a bottle of whiskey and swapping stories. Nora sat beside Elias, leaning against his shoulder, half asleep. You know, Caleb said, staring into the flames, I didn't think I'd ever see you again, Elias. After the war, you just disappeared. Elias took a sip of whiskey. I needed to. We all did, Marcus said. But you went further than most. Didn't feel far enough, Jonah chuckled. And now look at you, back in the fight. This isn't the same. Isn't it? Caleb said. Same stakes, same odds, same brothers. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I thought I was done. Thought I could just exist, keep my head down, stay out of trouble. And then Tom's kid showed up, Marcus said. Yeah. You ever regret it? Elias looked down at Nora, her small face peaceful in the firelight. No. Caleb grinned. Good, because it's too late to back out now. They laughed, low and tired, the kind of laugh men share when they know the worst is still coming. The next morning, a rider appeared on the ridge. Just one. He stayed there for an hour, watching, then rode off. They're scouting, Jonah said from the roof. Let them, Elias replied. They already know we're ready. But ready didn't mean safe, and they all knew it. That night, Elias sat with Nora on the porch. The stars were out, bright and cold, stretching across the sky like scattered glass. Do you ever get scared? Nora asked. All the time. You don't look scared. That's the trick. You feel it, but you don't let it run you. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, I'm scared. Elias put his arm around her. I know. What if they come and you can't stop them? Then we'll fight until we can't fight anymore. And even then, we won't stop. Why? Because you're worth it. Nora looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. Papa used to say that too. Your papa was a smart man. She rested her head against his shoulder. I miss him. I know you do. They sat there for a long time, watching the stars, listening to the night. And for a moment, just a moment, everything was quiet. But the quiet never lasted. Toot. The attack came at dawn. Elias woke to the sound of gunfire. He rolled out of bed, grabbed his rifle, and ran to the window. Outside, the yard was chaos. At least 15 men on horseback, circling the ranch, firing at the house and barn. Voss had brought an army. Nora, Elias shouted, get to your spot, now! She was already moving, scrambling out of bed and running to the back room. Elias heard the floorboards lift, heard her drop into the space below, heard the panel slide back into place. He ran to the front door and kicked it open. Caleb was already in position behind a stack of crates, firing methodically. Marcus was in the barn, his rifle cracking with every shot. Jonah was on the roof, picking off riders with cold precision. Elias took aim and fired. A rider fell. He fired again. Another one went down, but there were too many. A bullet shattered the window beside him. Another punched through the wall. Elias ducked behind the doorframe and reloaded. They're trying to flank us, Caleb shouted. Elias looked to the left and saw 3 riders breaking off, heading toward the back of the house. If they got around, they'd have a clear shot at the weak side. I've got them, Jonah yelled from the roof. He swung his rifle and fired. One rider dropped. He fired again. Another fell. The third turned and rode back. Voss isn't with them, Marcus shouted. Elias scanned the riders. Marcus was right. Voss was nowhere to be seen. He was letting his men do the dying. A rider charged the porch. Elias shot him in the chest. The man tumbled backward off his horse and hit the ground hard. The shooting went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The riders pulled back, regrouping at the edge of the property. Elias counted 11 still standing. 4 were down, dead or dying. It wasn't enough. Caleb reloaded and wiped blood from a cut on his cheek. They're testing us. They're going to come again, Marcus said, breathing hard. Jonah climbed down from the roof. We can't hold them off forever. Elias knew he was right. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on ammunition. If Voss sent another wave, they'd be overrun. We need to end this, Elias said. How? Caleb asked. Elias looked at the riders in the distance. Then he looked at the house, at the barn, at the land Tom had died trying to protect. We make Voss come to us. They didn't have to wait long. An hour later, a single rider approached, holding a white cloth tied to a stick. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. The rider stopped 20 yards out. Mr. Voss wants to talk. Tell him to come himself. The rider hesitated, then turned and rode back. 5 minutes later, Voss appeared, flanked by 4 men. He dismounted and walked forward, hands at his sides. Elias met him in the yard. You've made your point, Voss said. You're willing to die for the girl. I respect that. But this is pointless. You can't win. Neither can you, Elias said. You've lost 4 men already. How many more are you willing to lose? Voss's jaw tightened. As many as it takes. Then we'll keep killing them until you run out. Voss stared at him. You're insane. Maybe, but I'm not the one trying to steal a child. I'm not stealing anything. I have a legal... I don't care about your contract, Elias interrupted. And I don't care about your law. You're not taking her. That's the end of it. Voss's face darkened. Then you leave me no choice. He turned and walked back to his horse. This is your last chance, Mercer, he called over his shoulder. Surrender the girl, or I'll burn this place to the ground. Elias didn't answer. Voss mounted his horse and rode off, his men following. Caleb walked up beside Elias. He's going to come back with everything he's got. I know. We can't win this. Elias looked at him. We have to. Caleb nodded slowly. Then I guess we're all dying here. Not all of us, Elias said. He turned toward the house. Nora lives, no matter what. And as the sun climbed higher and the heat settled over the land, Elias Mercer prepared for war. The sun was high when they came again. This time there was no warning, no white flag, no attempt at conversation. Just the thunder of hooves and the crack of gunfire splitting the morning wide open. Elias saw them crest the ridge, 20 riders, maybe more, spread out in a line like a wave of iron and fury. Voss had gone back to town and recruited every gun he could find. Men who didn't care about contracts or debts or justice. Men who killed because they were paid to. Positions! Elias shouted. Caleb was already moving, diving behind the water trough. Marcus sprinted to the barn, throwing himself through the door as bullets chewed up the wood behind him. Jonah scrambled up the ladder to the roof, his rifle slung across his back. Elias dropped to one knee behind a stack of firewood and fired. The lead rider jerked backward and fell. His horse kept running, riderless, wild-eyed with panic. The others didn't slow down. They came in fast, firing as they rode, bullets tearing through the air like angry wasps. One shattered the window of the house. Another punched through the barn wall. A third kicked up dirt 2 inches from Elias's boot. He fired again. Missed, fired again. A man screamed and clutched his shoulder, but he didn't fall. He just kept riding, one hand on the reins, the other fumbling for his gun. They're splitting up, Caleb yelled. Elias looked left. 5 riders were peeling off, circling toward the back of the house. If they got around, they'd have a clear line to the door, to Nora. Marcus, backside! On it! Marcus's voice came from inside the barn, followed by the boom of his rifle. One of the flanking riders tumbled off his horse. The others hesitated, then kept going. Jonah fired from the roof. Another rider went down. Then another. The man was a machine, calm and methodical, picking them off one by one like he was shooting bottles off a fence. But there were too many. 3 riders charged the porch. Elias shot the first one in the chest. The second made it to the steps before Caleb's bullet took him in the throat. The third vaulted off his horse and crashed through the door, gun raised. Elias was already moving. He dropped his rifle, drew his pistol, and fired twice. The man staggered, blood spreading across his shirt, and collapsed in the doorway. Nora, stay down! Elias shouted. He didn't hear an answer, didn't expect one. She knew what to do. Outside, the shooting intensified. The riders who'd circled around were closing in on the barn. Marcus fired through a gap in the boards, dropping one, then another, but they kept coming. I'm out! Marcus yelled. Fall back to the house, Elias called. Marcus kicked open the barn door and ran, bullets kicking up dirt at his heels. He made it halfway across the yard before a shot caught him in the leg. He went down hard, rolling, cursing. Caleb broke from cover and ran to him, firing as he moved. He grabbed Marcus by the collar and dragged him toward the house. A bullet grazed Caleb's shoulder. He didn't stop. Elias provided cover fire, squeezing off shots until his pistol clicked empty. He reloaded, fingers moving on instinct, eyes never leaving the riders. One of them dismounted and ran toward the house, shotgun in hand. Elias shot him twice. The man kept coming. Elias shot him again. This time he dropped. Caleb hauled Marcus through the door. He's hit! Elias slammed the door shut and bolted it. How bad? Marcus gritted his teeth, blood seeping through his pant leg. Bad enough. Can you shoot? Can I breathe? Elias handed him a rifle. Then you can shoot. Marcus propped himself against the wall, rifle across his lap, and nodded. I'm good. Jonah climbed down from the roof and dropped through the window. They're regrouping. Looks like they're planning something. How many left? 12, maybe 13. Elias did the math. They'd killed 7, wounded a few more. But Voss still had the numbers. And they were running out of bullets. We can't hold them off much longer, Caleb said, reloading. Blood dripped from his shoulder, but he didn't seem to notice. We don't have to hold them off, Elias said. We just have to make them think twice about coming back. How do you plan on doing that? Elias looked out the window. The riders were gathered near the ridge, talking, gesturing, planning their next move. And in the center of them, sitting on a black horse, was Garrett Voss. He wasn't shooting, wasn't risking himself. Just watching, waiting for his men to do the dying. We go after Voss, Elias said. Caleb stared at him. You're out of your mind. Maybe, but if we take him out, the rest will scatter. Men like that don't die for a paycheck. Jonah grinned. I like it. Marcus shook his head. You'd have to get past 12 armed men first. Then we create a distraction. What kind of distraction? Elias walked to the back room and knocked on the floor. Nora, it's me. The panel slid open. Nora's face appeared, pale and streaked with tears. Are they gone? Not yet, but they will be. He reached down and helped her out. I need you to do something for me. What? There's a lantern in the barn and a can of kerosene. I need you to get them. Her eyes widened. You're going to burn it? If it means they stop coming for you, I'll burn everything. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Stay low. Stay quiet. Can you do that? Yes. Elias opened the back door and checked outside. The riders were still on the ridge, focused on the front of the house. The barn was only 20 yards away. Go! Fast! Nora slipped out and ran, her small frame barely visible in the dust and smoke. Elias watched, heart pounding, rifle ready. If anyone saw her, but no one did. She reached the barn, disappeared inside, and emerged a moment later with the lantern and the kerosene can. She ran back, and Elias pulled her inside, closing the door behind her. Good girl, he said. She was shaking, but she didn't cry. Elias took the kerosene and lantern and handed them to Jonah. You know what to do. Jonah nodded. Make it loud. Make it big. Jonah climbed back out the window and disappeared onto the roof. A minute later, Elias heard him moving toward the barn. Then the sound of liquid splashing. Then nothing. Elias turned to Caleb and Marcus. When it goes up, they'll come running. That's when we move. Caleb checked his rifle. And if Voss runs? He won't. Men like him don't run. They send others to die while they watch. Marcus grimaced. Then let's make sure he watches his men fail. Elias looked at Nora. You stay here, no matter what. Understand? What if you don't come back? Then you wait until it's quiet, and then you run. You run as far and as fast as you can, and you don't look back. Tears filled her eyes. I don't want you to go. Elias knelt down and took her hands. I know, but this is the only way. Your father gave his life so you could be free. I'm going to make sure it wasn't for nothing. She threw her arms around him, holding him tight. Elias closed his eyes and held her back, memorizing the feeling. Then he gently pulled away. Be brave, he said. You too. He stood and nodded to Caleb and Marcus. They moved to the door, weapons ready. And then the barn exploded. The blast shook the house. Flames shot into the sky, black smoke billowing upward like a funeral pyre. The heat was immediate and intense, a wave of fire that turned the barn into an inferno in seconds. The riders on the ridge shouted, pointing. 3 of them spurred their horses and rode toward the flames, trying to see what had happened. Now, Elias said. They burst through the door and ran. Caleb went left. Elias went right. Marcus hobbled behind them, using his rifle as a crutch. Jonah was already off the roof, circling wide, moving like a shadow. The riders saw them too late. Elias fired, dropping one before the man could raise his gun. Caleb took out another. Marcus, despite his wounded leg, put a bullet through a third man's chest. The rest of the riders scrambled, shouting, trying to regroup, but the fire had them disoriented, the smoke thick and choking. They couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Elias pushed forward, moving through the chaos like a storm. He fired until his rifle was empty, then drew his pistol and kept firing. Bodies fell. Horses screamed, blood mixed with dust and ash, and through it all, he kept his eyes on Voss. The man was still on his horse, shouting orders, trying to rally his men. But panic had set in. Men were running, dying. The tide had turned, and Voss knew it. Elias ran toward him, pistol raised. "Voss!" The man turned. His face went pale when he saw Elias coming. "You should have left her alone," Elias said. Voss reached for his gun. But before he could draw, a shot rang out. Voss jerked. Blood bloomed across his side. He looked down, stunned, then looked up. Standing 30 yards away, smoke rising from the barrel of his rifle, was Jonah. "That's for Tom," Jonah said. Voss swayed in the saddle, then fell, hitting the ground hard. His horse bolted, leaving him lying in the dirt, gasping, clutching his wound. Elias walked over and stood above him. Voss looked up, his face twisted with pain and fury. "This isn't over," Voss wheezed. "Yes, it is," Elias said. He raised his pistol. "Wait," Voss started. Elias pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the ranch, loud and final. Voss's body went still. For a moment, no one moved. The remaining riders, 6, maybe 7, stared at Voss's corpse. Then one by one, they turned and rode off, disappearing over the ridge. They didn't look back. Elias lowered his gun. His hands were shaking. His ears were ringing. Blood was everywhere, on his clothes, his face, the ground. He didn't know how much of it was his. Caleb limped over, breathing hard. "It's done." Marcus collapsed onto a rock, gripping his leg. "We actually did it." Jonah walked up, reloading his rifle. Tom would have been proud. Elias looked at the burning barn, the bodies scattered across the yard, the smoke rising into the sky. It looked like the end of the world, but Nora was safe, and that was all that mattered. He turned and walked back to the house. The door was still closed. He opened it slowly. Nora was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide. When she saw him, she ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "You came back," she sobbed. "I told you I would." She cried into his shirt, her whole body shaking. Elias held her, one hand on her head, the other on her back, and let her cry. She'd been holding it in for so long, the fear, the grief, the weight of everything she'd lost. "It's over," he said quietly. "No one's coming for you anymore." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Promise?" "I promise." She buried her face in his chest and cried harder. Outside, Caleb and Marcus were tending to their wounds. Jonah was checking the bodies, making sure none of them were playing dead. The fire was starting to die down, leaving nothing but charred wood and ash. Elias didn't care about any of it. He just stood there, holding Nora, feeling the weight of everything lift off his shoulders. They'd won. Against impossible odds, against a man with money and power and an army of guns, they'd won, and Nora was free. That night, they buried the dead. Not Voss, not his men, but the 4 who'd stood with them, friends who'd given their lives defending a child they barely knew, men who'd answered the call because it was the right thing to do. They dug the graves in silence, working by lantern light, too tired to speak. When they were done, they stood around the fresh earth and said nothing. There were no words for what they'd lost, no prayers that could bring them back. But they'd died for something. That had to mean something. Nora stood beside Elias, holding his hand. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough. Instead, she just stood there, staring at the graves, her face solemn and old beyond her years. "Are they in heaven?" she asked quietly. Elias didn't know how to answer that. He'd stopped believing in heaven a long time ago, but he didn't want to take that hope away from her. "If there is one," he said, "they're there." She nodded. "Papa's there too." "Yeah, he is." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For keeping me safe. For not letting them take me." Elias knelt down beside her. "I made a promise to your father, and I keep my promises." She smiled, a small, fragile smile. "I know." They stood there for a while longer, then walked back to the house. Caleb and Marcus were inside, patching each other up. Jonah was sitting on the porch, cleaning his rifle. "What now?" Caleb asked when Elias walked in. "Now we rebuild," Elias said. And the girl? Elias looked at Nora, who was sitting at the table, hands folded in her lap, watching him. She stays, he said, for as long as she wants. Nora's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. Not tears of fear or grief, tears of relief. Forever? She asked. Elias nodded. Forever. She got up and hugged him again, and this time Elias let himself hold her like she was his own, because in a way, she was. The next morning, a rider came from town, not one of Voss's men, a lawman. He looked around at the destruction, the burned barn, the blood-stained earth, the bodies already starting to bloat in the sun. Hell of a fight, he said. Self-defense, Elias replied. The lawman nodded. I heard. Voss had it coming. Man's been bleeding this territory dry for years. Folks are glad he's gone. What about his contracts? Null and void, judge already ruled. No one's coming for the girl, she's free. Elias felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you. The lawman tipped his hat. You did this territory a favor, Mercer. Don't expect any trouble from us. He rode off, leaving Elias standing in the yard, staring at the horizon. It was over, truly over. Nora came out onto the porch, shielding her eyes from the sun. What did he say? He said, you're free. She smiled, a real smile this time. Really? Really? She ran to him and hugged him so tight he thought she might break. But he didn't mind. He held her just as tight. Behind them, Caleb, Marcus, and Jonah emerged from the house. They looked like hell, bruised, bloodied, exhausted. But they were alive. Guess that's it then, Marcus said. Guess so, Caleb agreed. Jonah stretched. What do we do now? Elias looked at the ranch, at the land, at the girl in his arms. We live, he said, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The rebuilding started the next morning. Elias stood in the ruins of the barn, surveying the blackened timber and ash, the twisted metal that had once held the structure together. Everything was gone, the hay, the tools, the stalls where the horses had stood. 20 years of work reduced to nothing in a single night. But they were alive, and that was worth more than any barn. Caleb walked up beside him, a bandage wrapped around his shoulder. Could be worse. Could be better. Could be dead. Elias nodded. Fair point. Marcus limped over, using a makeshift crutch. His leg was wrapped tight, but he was moving, slowly but moving. We going to stand here staring at it, or are we going to build something? Build what? Jonah asked, joining them. We don't have lumber, don't have nails. Hell, we don't even have a hammer that isn't buried under a pile of ash. Then we get them, Elias said. Town's got a mill. We buy what we need. With what money? Caleb asked. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I've got some saved. Not much, but enough to get started. That's your money, Elias. You shouldn't have to. It's done, Elias interrupted. This is my land, my fight, my choice. Caleb looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, then let's get to work. They spent the morning clearing debris. Nora helped, carrying small pieces of charred wood to a pile they were making near the edge of the property. She didn't complain, didn't ask questions, just worked, her small hands blackened with soot, her face set with determination. Elias watched her out of the corner of his eye. She'd changed in the days since the fight. Something in her had hardened, not in a bad way, but in the way people harden when they've survived something they shouldn't have. She was still a child, but there was steel in her now, the kind that didn't bend. By noon, they'd cleared enough space to start planning. Elias sketched out a rough design in the dirt, a smaller barn, simpler, but sturdy. They'd need at least a week to build it, maybe 2, and that was if nothing went wrong. We'll need help, Marcus said, staring at the sketch. 4 men and a girl aren't enough to raise a barn in 2 weeks. I'll ask around town, Elias said. See if anyone's willing. After what just happened, Jonah said. People might not want to get involved. Or they might see it as a chance to stick it to Voss one more time, Caleb countered. Man made a lot of enemies. Plenty of folks would be happy to help bury his legacy. Elias stood and brushed the dirt off his hands. Either way, I'm going to find out. He saddled his horse and rode into town, leaving Nora with Caleb, Marcus, and Jonah. She didn't want him to go. He could see it in her eyes. But she didn't ask him to stay. She was learning that sometimes people had to leave, even when you didn't want them to. The ride took an hour. The town of Cutter's Gap was small, dusty, and mean, the kind of place where men drank too much and talked too little. Elias tied his horse outside the general store and walked in. The shopkeeper, a thin man named Amos, looked up from behind the counter. His eyes widened when he saw Elias. "Heard you had some trouble out at your place." "You could say that." "Heard Voss is dead." "He is." Amos nodded slowly. "Can't say I'm sorry to hear it. Man was a plague on this town." "I need supplies," Elias said. "Lumber, nails, tools, whatever you've got." "I've got plenty. Question is, can you pay for it?" Elias pulled a small pouch from his pocket and set it on the counter. "That enough?" Amos opened the pouch and counted the coins inside. Then he looked up. "This is more than enough." "Then put the rest toward anyone else who needs it." Amos stared at him. "You serious?" "I am." The shopkeeper shook his head, a faint smile on his face. "You're a strange man, Mercer, but I respect it." He started pulling items off the shelves, nails, hammers, saws. "I'll have the lumber delivered by tomorrow." "Anything else?" "I need men, good men who aren't afraid of hard work." Amos thought for a moment. "There's a few. Old Henry's got a strong back, even if he's got more years behind him than ahead. The Calloway boys might help, no relation to the Calloway who rode with Voss. They're good kids. And there's a drifter named Silas who's been hanging around. He's quiet, but he knows his way around a hammer. Send word, tell them there's work if they want it, and a hot meal at the end of the day." Amos grinned. "I'll spread the word." Elias walked out of the store and stood on the wooden sidewalk, looking down the street. The town was quiet, almost sleepy. A few people moved about, going through their daily routines, oblivious to the war that had just been fought a few miles away. A woman approached him, middle-aged, with kind eyes and a worn shawl draped over her shoulders. "You're Elias Mercer, aren't you?" "I am." "I heard what you did. For Tom Hale's daughter." Elias didn't know what to say to that. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman continued. "Tom was a good man. He helped my family once when my husband died, gave us food when we had nothing. It's good to know his daughter's safe." "She is." The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. "It's not much, just some bread and cheese, but I thought the girl might like it." Elias took the bundle, his throat tight. "Thank you." The woman smiled and walked away. Over the next hour, 3 more people approached him. A farmer who offered to lend a hand with the rebuilding, a widow who brought a quilt she'd sewn, a young boy who handed him a handful of wildflowers and said, "These are for the girl. Tell her I'm glad she's okay." By the time Elias rode back to the ranch, the saddlebags on his horse were full of gifts: food, blankets, tools, even a small wooden doll someone had carved. It wasn't much, but it was something. And it was enough to remind him that not everyone in the world was like Voss. When he arrived, Nora ran out to meet him. "You're back." "I am." He handed her the bundle of wildflowers. "These are for you." She took them, her face lighting up. "They're beautiful. A boy in town wanted you to have them." She held the flowers close and smiled. "I'll put them in water." That night they ate together, Elias, Nora, Caleb, Marcus, and Jonah. The meal was simple, but it felt like a feast. They talked and laughed, and for a little while, the weight of everything they'd been through lifted. Nora sat beside Elias, the flowers in a jar on the table in front of her. "Do you think Papa would be happy?" Elias looked at her. "I think he'd be proud." "Of me?" "Of you. Of what you did. Of how brave you were." She looked down at her plate. "I didn't feel brave. I felt scared." "That's what bravery is," Marcus said. "Doing what you have to do, even when you're scared out of your mind." Jonah nodded. "Your old man knew that. That's why he trusted you with that letter. He knew you'd make it." Nora's eyes glistened. "I miss him." "We all do," Caleb said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling in the hearth. Then Nora spoke again. "What happens now?" Elias set down his fork. "Now we build and we live, and we make sure your father's sacrifice wasn't for nothing." "How do we do that?" "By being happy. by making this place a home, by proving that good people can still win. Nora smiled, a small, hopeful smile. I'd like that. The next day, the men from town arrived. Old Henry, the Calloway boys, and Silas, the drifter. They came with tools and strong backs, and they worked without complaint. By the end of the first week, the frame of the new barn was up. By the end of the second, the walls were in place. Nora was there every day, helping where she could. She carried water, held boards steady, handed out nails. The men treated her with kindness and respect, and she soaked it up like sunlight. On the third week, something unexpected happened. A wagon rolled up to the ranch, pulled by 2 horses. A man and a woman sat on the driver's seat, and in the back were 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Elias walked out to meet them, curious. The man climbed down and extended his hand. Name's William Cross. This is my wife, Clara, and our kids. We heard what you did for Tom Hale's daughter. Heard you stood up to Voss. Elias shook his hand. Word travels fast. It does, and we wanted to help. We've got a farm about 10 miles south. Voss tried to take it from us a few years back. We managed to fight him off, but just barely. If you hadn't stopped him, he would have come for us again. Clara climbed down and smiled at Elias. We brought food and some tools you might need. It's the least we can do. Elias didn't know what to say. You didn't have to do that. We wanted to, William said. You gave us hope, gave all of us hope. The children climbed out of the wagon, and the girl, about Nora's age, ran up to her. Hi, I'm Emma. Want to be friends? Nora blinked, surprised, then smiled. Yeah, I'd like that. The 2 girls ran off together, laughing, and Elias felt something shift in his chest. Nora had been through hell, but she was still a child, and children needed other children. Over the next few days, more people came. Families who'd been hurt by Voss, men who wanted to pay their respects to Tom, women who brought food and blankets and words of encouragement. The ranch, which had been a place of violence and death just weeks ago, was slowly becoming something else, a community. By the time the barn was finished, there were over 20 people gathered at the ranch. They stood in a circle around the new structure, admiring the work. Old Henry clapped Elias on the shoulder. You did good, son. We all did, Elias replied. No, Henry said. You started it. You stood up when no one else would. That takes guts. Elias looked at the barn, then at the people around him. He thought about Tom and the letter and the promise he'd made. He thought about Nora, running around with Emma, laughing for the first time in weeks. And he realized something. He'd spent the last 20 years trying to hide from the world, trying to bury his past and live in isolation. But isolation hadn't saved him. It had just made him lonely. It was Nora who'd saved him, not the other way around. She'd given him a reason to fight, a reason to care, a reason to believe that the world was still worth fighting for. That night, after everyone had gone home, Elias and Nora sat on the porch. The stars were out, bright and endless. Do you think things will be okay now? Nora asked. I think they will, Elias said. Do you think more bad people will come? Maybe, but if they do, we'll be ready. She leaned against him. I'm glad I'm here, with you. Elias put his arm around her. I'm glad you're here too. They sat in silence, watching the stars, and for the first time in a long time, Elias felt at peace. The danger was over. The debt was paid. And Nora was safe. But more than that, she was home. A few days later, a letter arrived from the county seat. Elias opened it and read it twice, just to make sure he understood. It was from a judge. All of Voss's contracts had been declared null and void. Any debts owed to him were erased. Any claims he'd made on property or people were invalidated. Nora was legally free. Elias showed her the letter. She read it slowly, her lips moving as she sounded out the words. When she finished, she looked up at him. Does this mean no one can take me away? No one, Elias said. You're free, Nora, completely and totally free. She threw her arms around him and held on tight. Thank you, she whispered. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. You saved me. Elias pulled back and looked her in the eye. We saved each other. And it was true. She'd saved him from a life of isolation and regret, and he'd saved her from a life of fear and servitude. They were even. Over the following weeks, life on the ranch settled into a rhythm. Elias taught Nora how to ride, how to rope, how to mend a fence. She learned fast, soaking up every lesson like a sponge. Caleb, Marcus, and Jonah stayed for a while, helping with the work. But eventually they said their goodbyes. They had their own lives to get back to, their own battles to fight. But before they left, they stood with Elias one last time. "You ever need us?" Caleb said. "You send word. We'll come." "I know," Elias said. Marcus grinned. "And keep an eye on that girl. She's tougher than she looks." "I will." Jonah tipped his hat. "Tom would be proud, Elias. Real proud." "I hope so." They rode off, disappearing over the ridge, and Elias stood there for a long time, watching them go. Then he turned and walked back to the house, where Nora was waiting. "Are they gone?" she asked. "Yeah." "Will we see them again?" "I think so." She nodded. "Good. I like them." "Me too." They went inside, and Elias closed the door behind them. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Not anymore. It was full of life, full of hope, full of the future. And for the first time in 20 years, Elias Mercer wasn't running from his past. He was building toward his future, with Nora by his side. The seasons changed, and with them, so did the ranch. What had been a place of solitude and silence became something else entirely, a home filled with laughter and purpose. Elias watched it happen gradually, like spring thaw melting winter ice, revealing the life that had been waiting underneath all along. Nora grew, not just in height, though she did that too, but in confidence. The frightened child who'd arrived barefoot with a blood-stained letter was becoming someone new. She learned to laugh again, to play, to dream beyond the nightmares that had followed her from that terrible night. The nightmares came less frequently now. At first, Elias had woken to her screams almost every night, those raw, terrified cries that cut through the darkness like broken glass. He'd go to her room, sit on the edge of her bed, and hold her hand until her breathing steadied and the fear retreated back into whatever shadows it lived in. "I saw Papa again," she'd whisper. "I saw them shooting him." "I know," Elias would say, "but he's not hurting anymore, and you're safe. That's what matters." "Will I always see it?" "Maybe, but it'll get easier. The hard things always do, given enough time." He'd been right. By the second month, the screams came only once a week. By the third, they'd faded to soft whimpers. By the 6th month, she slept through most nights, and when she did wake, she'd pad quietly to his room and stand in the doorway until he stirred. "Can't sleep?" he'd ask. "Just wanted to make sure you were still here." "I'm still here." "Okay." And she'd go back to bed. Winter came hard that year, blanketing the ranch in snow that transformed the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful. Elias taught Nora how to track rabbits in the fresh powder, how to read the sky for coming storms, how to keep the animals fed when the wind cut like knives. They spent long evenings by the fire, and Elias found himself talking more than he had in years. He told her about the war, not the violent parts, but the parts about friendship and loyalty and men who'd become brothers. He told her about Tom, about the night her father had pulled him from that burning trench while bullets sang overhead. "Papa never told me that story," Nora said, her eyes wide. "Your father wasn't one to brag about the good he did. He just did it." "Were you scared? In the war?" Elias stared into the fire. "Every single day." "But you fought anyway." "Had to. Sometimes you don't get to choose whether you're scared. You only get to choose what you do about it." She was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said, "That's what Papa did. When those men came, he was scared, but he fought anyway." "That's exactly what he did. And that's what you did too, for me." Elias looked at her, this small girl who'd survived more than most adults ever would. "That's what family does." She smiled and leaned against him. "I like being family." "Me too, kid, me too." "Me." Spring arrived like a promise kept. The snow melted, revealing the earth beneath, ready for planting. Elias and Nora worked the garden together, her small hands helping him press seeds into the soil. She asked endless questions: what would grow, when it would come up, whether they could plant flowers too. "Flowers?" Elias asked. "Mama used to grow them, before she got sick." She said they reminded her that beautiful things can grow even in hard places. Elias looked at her serious little face. Then we'll plant flowers. They did. Wildflowers along the fence, climbing roses near the house, sunflowers that would grow tall and bright against the summer sky. Nora tended them faithfully, watering them every morning, talking to them like they were friends. You're going to spoil those flowers, Elias teased. Papa said Mama talked to hers too. He said it helped them grow. Then talk away. The ranch began to change in other ways too. Word had spread about what had happened with Voss, and people started coming around more often. Not out of pity or obligation, but because they wanted to. The Cross family became regular visitors, and Emma and Nora became inseparable. Other families followed, farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers from town. They'd arrive on Sunday afternoons bringing food and stories, staying until sunset. The ranch that had been Elias's fortress became something else, a gathering place, a refuge, a symbol of what happened when good people refused to back down. Old Henry stopped by one spring morning, his weathered face thoughtful. You know what you've done here, don't you? Built a barn? Elias said. Henry laughed. More than that, you've given people hope, shown them that men like Voss don't always win. That matters more than you know. I just kept a promise to a friend. Maybe, but sometimes keeping one promise changes everything. That summer, Nora turned 9. Elias had asked her what she wanted, and she'd thought about it for a long time before answering. I want to visit Papa's grave. Elias's chest tightened. They'd buried Tom properly, once things had settled, given him a real funeral in the town cemetery, with a stone that bore his name and the dates of his too short life. But Nora hadn't been ready to see it. Not then. You sure? Elias asked. She nodded. I need to tell him something. They rode into town together on a bright morning when the air smelled like grass and wildflowers. The cemetery sat on a low hill overlooking the valley, peaceful and quiet. Tom's grave was beneath an old oak tree, the stone simple but sturdy. Nora stood there for a long time, just looking at it. Then she knelt down and touched the carved letters of her father's name. Hi, Papa, she said softly. I'm sorry it took me so long to come. I was scared at first, scared that seeing your name on a stone would make it too real. Elias stood back, giving her space. But I wanted you to know I'm okay. Better than okay. Elias kept his promise. He kept me safe, just like you asked. And he's teaching me things, how to ride and rope and be strong. He tells me stories about you, about the war, about the good things you did. Her voice wavered. I miss you so much, every single day. But I'm not scared anymore. Not like I was. Because I know what you would want. You'd want me to be happy, to live, to grow up and be someone you'd be proud of. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she kept talking. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you proud, Papa. I promise. She stayed there for a few more minutes, then stood and wiped her eyes. When she turned to Elias, her face was different, lighter somehow, like she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying. Thank you for bringing me, she said. Anytime you want to come back, we will. She nodded. Maybe next time I'll bring flowers. From the garden. The ones Mama used to grow. I think your father would like that. They rode home as the sun climbed higher, and Nora talked the whole way. About Emma, about the foal that had been born in the barn, about a book she was reading that Elias had bought for her in town. She was becoming herself again. Or maybe for the first time. The years passed like water, steady, persistent, shaping everything in their path. Nora grew from a girl into a young woman, tall and strong and sure of herself. She learned everything Elias could teach her about ranching, and then taught herself more. She could rope better than most men, ride like she'd been born in a saddle, and shoot straight enough to win contests at the county fair. But she was more than just tough. She was kind. She helped the Cross family when their barn burned. She taught the younger children in town to read. She became the kind of person people turned to when they needed help. Elias watched it all with quiet pride. He'd raised her the best he knew how, not as his daughter exactly, but as something close to it. She called him Elias, never Dad, and he'd never asked her to. But the bond between them ran deeper than names. One evening, when Nora was 16, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. She'd grown quiet over the past few days, thoughtful in a way that reminded Elias of her father. "What's on your mind?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Emma's family is moving. Her father got a job 3 territories over. They're leaving next month." "That's hard. I know you two are close." "We are. But that's not what's bothering me." She paused. "It made me think about Papa, about how he died so I could have a life. And I've been wondering, am I living it right? Am I doing what he would have wanted?" Elias turned to look at her. "What do you think he would have wanted?" "For me to be happy, to be safe, to have choices." "And are you those things?" She nodded slowly. "I am, because of you." "Not just because of me, because of your father, because of what he did." "But you kept his promise. You could have turned me away that day, could have told me you didn't know my father or that his problems weren't yours. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." "Why?" Elias thought about it. "Because I knew what it cost him to send you to me. Knew he was using his last breath to ask for help. How could I say no to that?" Nora smiled. "I'm glad you didn't." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. Then Nora spoke again. "I want to stay here, on the ranch, help you run it." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You sure? You could go anywhere, do anything. You're smart enough for school, strong enough for any work you want." "I know. But this is home. This is where Papa sent me, where you kept me safe, where I learned who I am." She looked at him. "Unless you don't want me to stay." "Don't want you." Elias shook his head. "Nora, this ranch wouldn't be the same without you. Of course I want you to stay. For as long as you want." She grinned. "Then it's settled." More years passed. Nora became a woman, capable and confident. She ran half the ranch, Elias the other half, and together they built something solid. The land prospered, the animals thrived, and the community that had formed around them grew stronger. Caleb, Marcus, and Jonah visited when they could. They were older now, grayer, slower, but still the same men who'd stood beside Elias when the world had gone to hell. They'd sit around the fire, telling old stories and new ones, laughing about things that hadn't been funny at the time but somehow were now. "You did good, Elias," Caleb said one night. "Tom would be proud." "We all did good," Elias replied. "Couldn't have done it without you." "Still," Marcus said, gesturing toward where Nora was talking with some neighbors. "Look at her. She's everything Tom hoped she'd become." Jonah raised his glass. "To Tom, and to promises kept." They all drank to that. When Nora was 23, a young man from town started coming around. His name was Daniel, and he was respectful, hardworking, and clearly smitten. Elias watched from a distance, amused and slightly protective. "What do you think of him?" Nora asked one day. "Does it matter what I think?" "Of course it does." Elias studied her face. "Do you love him?" She blushed. "I think I might." "Does he treat you right?" "He does." "Then that's all that matters." She hugged him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me make my own choices, for trusting me. You've earned it 1,000 times over." 2 years later, they were married. The wedding took place on the ranch beneath the same oak tree where Elias and Tom had once sat and talked about the future. Half the territory showed up. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Elias watched Nora dance with Daniel, watched her laugh and spin and shine like the sun itself. And he thought about Tom, about that letter in a boot, about the promise that had changed everything. Clara Cross approached him, her hair gray now, but her smile unchanged. "You must be proud." "I am." "You raised her well." "I just gave her space to become who she was meant to be." Clara patted his arm. "That's what good fathers do." The word hit him unexpectedly. Father. He'd never thought of himself that way, but maybe he had been, in all the ways that mattered. Nora and Daniel built a house on the edge of the ranch property, close enough to help with the work, far enough to have their own life. And when their first child was born, a boy with Tom's eyes and Nora's smile, they named him Thomas. "After my father," Nora explained, holding the baby while Elias looked on. And after the man who kept me safe so I could have this life. Elias's throat was too tight to speak. He just nodded. Will you teach him? Nora asked. The way you taught me? If his mother will let me. She's counting on it. The years continued their steady march. Elias grew older, his hair turning white, his hands becoming gnarled with age and work. But he never stopped, never slowed. There was always work to do, always something that needed fixing or tending, and there was always family. Because that's what the ranch had become, not just his and Nora's, but something bigger. A place where people belonged, where they were welcomed, where they were safe. Young Thomas grew, and then his sister came, and then another brother. The ranch filled with the sounds of children playing, running through the fields, learning to ride, learning to be strong and kind and brave. Elias taught them all, the same way he taught Nora, and every time he looked at them, he saw Tom, saw the sacrifice that had made all of this possible. One autumn evening, when the air was crisp and the leaves were turning gold, Elias and Nora sat on the porch together. They did this often now, just sitting and talking, watching the sunset and the life they'd built together. Do you ever regret it? Nora asked, taking me in? Elias looked at her, this woman who'd arrived as a broken child and become someone extraordinary. Not for a single second. Even with everything that happened, the fighting, the danger, especially because of that, it meant something. Your father's death meant something, and you turned that meaning into this. He gestured at the ranch, at her house in the distance, at the children playing in the yard. You turned tragedy into life. That's about the best thing a person can do. Nora's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't have done it without you. You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. She took his weathered hand in hers. Thank you for everything, for keeping the promise, for giving me a home, for teaching me that good people still exist even when the world feels dark. You taught me the same thing, Elias said. I was hiding out here trying to forget about the world. You reminded me that some things are worth fighting for. They sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Papa would be proud, Nora said softly, of both of us. Yeah, Elias agreed. I think he would. That night, after Nora had gone home and the ranch was quiet, Elias walked to his room and opened the drawer of his bedside table. Inside, carefully folded and preserved, was Tom's letter. He'd kept it all these years, reading it sometimes when he needed to remember why any of this mattered. He unfolded it now, the paper soft and fragile with age. Tom's handwriting stared back at him, each word a ghost of the man who'd written them. Don't let him take her. I didn't, Elias whispered to the empty room. I kept my promise, Tom. She's safe. She's happy. She's everything you hoped she'd be. He folded the letter carefully and put it back in the drawer. Years passed. Elias grew frailer, though he refused to admit it. He still worked the ranch, still taught the children, still sat on the porch every evening watching the world turn, but his steps were slower now, his hands shakier, his breath shorter. Nora worried, but she didn't push. She just made sure he was never alone, that there was always someone checking on him, bringing him meals, sitting with him when the nights got long. One spring morning, Elias woke to the smell of wildflowers. He walked outside to find the whole fence line covered in blooms, the same kind Nora's mother used to grow, the same ones Nora had planted all those years ago. Nora was standing there, her children around her, all of them smiling. Happy birthday, she said. Elias blinked. It's my birthday? You're 80 years old today. We thought you should celebrate. He looked at the flowers, at the family gathered around him, at the life that had grown from a single act of courage on a terrible night so many years ago. This is more than I deserve, he said quietly. It's exactly what you deserve, Nora replied. She walked over and kissed his cheek. Thank you for everything, Elias, for being the father I needed when I lost mine, for showing me what it means to keep a promise. Elias's eyes filled with tears. You were worth every promise I ever made. They spent the day together, all of them, celebrating not just a birthday, but everything they'd built. The ranch that had been a battlefield was now a home. The child who'd arrived barefoot and terrified was now a woman with her own children. The man who'd thought he was done with living had found purpose in protecting a single life. As the sun set that evening, Elias sat on the porch one last time, surrounded by the people he loved. Nora sat beside him, her hand in his. "Do you know what the best part is?" she asked. "What's that?" "Papa's story didn't end when he died. It kept going, through me, through my children, through every person who knows what you did and tries to be braver because of it." Elias smiled. "That's the thing about promises kept. They echo longer than we ever expect. Then let's make sure this one keeps echoing." "It will," Elias said. "As long as people like you are around, it will." The stars came out, bright and endless, the same stars that had watched over a scared little girl carrying a boot across the desert, the same stars that had looked down on a ranch under siege, the same stars that now witnessed peace. And Elias Mercer, the man who'd kept an impossible promise, closed his eyes and knew that everything, all the fighting, all the pain, all the years, had been worth it. Because Nora lived, and she would keep living, keep growing, keep teaching her children about the man who gave his life and the man who honored that gift. The promise had been kept, and it would never be forgotten. The ranch settled into night, quiet and peaceful, a testament to what happens when one person decides that love matters more than safety, that some debts are worth paying no matter the cost, and that a child's life is worth fighting for until your very last breath. Tom Hale had known it. Elias Mercer had proven it. And Nora Hale carried that truth forward into a future bright with hope. The letter in the boot had changed everything, and its echo would ring through generations, a reminder that the best promises aren't the easy ones. They're the ones that cost us everything and give us back even more.